So it's beyond policy and compliance to inclusion. Some of the things I want to talk to you today are how at the university we've interrogated our talent pipeline to identify gender inequality and how we've then actioned to try and redress what we've found. I'll talk to you a bit about some of the tools we've used to make a real difference in terms of attracting and retaining disabled talent. And I'll talk at the end about becoming a Stonewall Top 100 employer and about the journey that the university's been on over the last 2 years. So firstly, around the talent pipeline. All public sector bodies have a duty to publish their equality and diversity information. And for too long, lots of organizations would publish data like this. Here's our data on gender. We employ more women. We've nailed gender equality because there are more women that work for us. And clearly this masks a huge issue in terms of the career progression of women within an organization. So what we did, we started breaking down to a more granular level our data and publishing it as well. So we first started to look at our academic pipeline, which goes from those people in kind of entry-level research posts through lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, and professor. And you can see that whilst we're doing slightly better than the national averages that are shown in blue, there is a downward trajectory in terms of the proportion of women from the entry-level grades to the higher grades. And looking at the data in this way allowed us to identify certain turning points. So the data here shows that nationally, the turning point for women, or the proportion of women in higher education, happens at the senior lecturer role. Again, we're slightly better that's happening at the reader role, but that is the point where there is a divergence of the careers of men and women in higher education. Drilling down further, if you look at the research route, so there are 2 routes in the academy, either through learning and teaching and management or through pure research. And actually the divergence there is huge in terms of women. So why aren't women pursuing a research route career? Research careers are often linked with long hours. They're often linked with international travel, international conferences. None of those are particularly family friendly. By contrast, if we look at the learning and teaching route and the management route, much, much closer. So we knew that women were choosing to go down that route. However, there are fewer opportunities to reach the professoriate through a pure learning and teaching route. It's always seen as the research route that's the most important and is the most credible. We looked at the differences in subjects as well. So this graph shows our STEM populations. That's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. And here, the gap is the absolute greatest in terms of men and women progressing to the professoriate. So what do? We developed a 4-year action plan, more than 50 actions intended to address gender inequality. And to give you a flavour of some of those actions that we've introduced, we want to engage with those women who have been promoted. What had worked for them? What had been successful? And just as importantly, what hadn't worked? It was very easy for us to suggest particular activities that might work, but had they? Once we'd identified those turning points in men and women's careers, actually it's at that point, or even before that point, that we can use targeted intervention around mentoring and coaching. It's no good by the time women get to reader. Actually, at those early career stages, it's about identifying those women that want to progress and that can progress, and start those interventions earlier in the career pipeline. We've now incorporated unconscious bias training into training for all recruitment and selection panel members. This is mandatory, and unless somebody's undergone that training, they are not permitted to sit on a recruitment selection panel. And that has to be updated no greater than every 2 years. We're looking at the engagement with our recruitment agencies. We do use search agencies for senior hires. And what we're saying to them is that it's incumbent upon you to present us with a diverse talent pool. And increasingly, we should be using our public sector procurement powers to force those agencies and those organizations to essentially earn their money. So we're pushing our recruitment agencies to bring us diverse talent pools. And we've developed mechanisms for identifying women candidates for senior appointments and doing that as early in the career pipeline as possible. The next set of slides that I wanted to run through was around how we've developed some tools that we think make a real difference to engaging with disabled people and attracting and retaining disabled talent. We know there are 13.9 million disabled people in the UK and that they are twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. We also know that disabled people are actually underemployed. They're overrepresented in entry-level roles and in low-skill roles. It's estimated that a 10 percentage point rise in employment rate amongst disabled adults would contribute an extra 12 billion to the economy by the year 2030. So as such, disabled people represent a huge untapped resource. And we recognise the importance of disabled people being in work, and these are the tools that we've kind of developed to help do that. So the first thing I want to talk about is our Access for All website. We recognise that we very easily just send out an email to a candidate to invite them for interview, and they'll turn up and they may be nervous. We all expect that on the day. But actually for a large number of disabled people, they have the additional barrier of, okay, where is this building? Am I going to be able to get into this building? Is this building accessible? Are there going to be accessible toilets in that building? So what our Access for All pages do is they list all of the buildings on campus. So just for the example, this is All Saints buildings. This is the building that I work in. It has a floor map of every floor showing the accessible entrances, the accessible emergency exit points, all of the accessible toilets, and indeed those rooms in which an induction loop is fitted. And in addition to that, there is a 360-degree image of the entrance of every building. So if I know I've got to go to All Saints building, I can click on there and go, actually, I can see there's a ramp up to the entrance of All Saints building. That is one less stress for me as a disabled candidate or disabled applicant. We also produce a huge number of publications aimed at disabled people and indeed their line managers. So we have guidance support for disabled staff, FAQs for managers, a checklist for line managers, disabled staff. That will be around what reasonable adjustments have you offered this individual? Have you discussed personal evacuation plans for this individual? Is there any occupational health report or any occupational health resource needed? And I guess from the context of this conference, the fourth guide there is FAQs for disabled candidates and prospective employees. So that when disabled candidates come onto our web pages, actually there's a set of FAQs just for them. And they include things like, what is a disability? Why should I read this information? Why should I disclose a disability? And we talk about in a fairly non-threatening way how actually, if you disclose to us that you're disabled, that allows us to put the adjustments in place to ensure that you get a fair crack of the whip. What type of support's available at the university when I commence work? What are reasonable adjustments, and is there disabled car parking? So all of these questions that disabled candidates may have, perhaps even before submitting an application, is available online on our recruitment web pages. We also offer all disabled staff an annual reasonable adjustment meeting, and we have a form, and that has what has been agreed, what adjustments are required, and that form or that document stays with that employee. So if they transfer to a different department, they have an agreement that says, this is what you have said you will do. If their line manager changes, they have a permanent record of the adjustments that the university has agreed to do. It also provides details of how the individual wants to be kept in contact should they be absent from work, emergency contact details, and a permanent record of the agreement that's been reached. And that gets updated every 12 months. I say every 12 months, at least every 12 months. If an individual's condition changes and the support changes, then that form can actually be revisited at any time. The last thing I wanted to talk about before I kind of take questions and or discussion is around our journey to becoming a Stonewall Top 100 employer. So I guess most people should be aware that the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index is a definitive benchmark that lists the top 100 LGBT inclusive employers. Around about 437 employers apply each year through a long questionnaire which requires you to upload evidence and talk about your commitment. So some of the things that we've done, and I'll talk about our results at the end, things like appointing a champion, developing a staff network, developing inclusive policies, and then I'm going to show some good practice tips and some that are really, really inexpensive in terms of demonstrating your commitment. So in 2016, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the university took on the role as a senior LGBT champion. For those of you who don't work in higher education, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor is essentially the Deputy Chief Executive. Seniority is really, really important. If your champion isn't a senior person, ideally somebody operating at your exec level, then you can't expect the rest of the organisation to take the agenda seriously. Authenticity is key. Your champion has to actually do stuff, so they can't just have, I'm the senior LGBT champion or LGBT role model. They actually have to do things as well, otherwise it'll look piecemeal. They have to be visible as well in their role. I put a question at the end, is it important that a senior champion identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual or trans? I think there's a discussion for both sides. I think it's important that you show senior out LGBT people in the organisation. It demonstrates to your LGBT staff you can get to that level in this organisation. But equally importantly, shouldn't heterosexual people be banging the drum for LGBT equality? You would expect LGBT people to be doing that piece around equality, but it can equally be as powerful if heterosexual people are promoting LGBT equality. So we developed a LGBT staff network. If you haven't done this and it's something you'd like to do, the first bullet point is really, really important, and that's terms of reference. Really important because actually we were able to incorporate into the terms of reference that any member of staff is entitled to go to these network meetings that are held termly. This is work. This is not a 2-hour coffee and cake meeting. This actually contributes to the overall equality and diversity strategy at the university. Ownership by the network itself is crucial. This is not a HR thing that people are invited to. So we have network co-chairs. So we have one academic co-chair and one non-academic co-chair. And they have to own the network, run the network, and define the direction of the network. It's also important to have some kind of reporting route. So the university has a university-wide Equality and Diversity Committee, and each of our staff networks are officially subcommittees of that group. So once a term, and indeed it'll be Monday afternoon, our LGBT staff network co-chair will present a report to Diversity Committee, again, which is chaired by the Deputy Vice-Chancellor. So you get any of those issues or any of that work, any of that activity being reported to the very top. You can utilise your network to recruit role models and allies. Our network includes allies. If you're developing a network, you might want to think, do you want to keep it strictly LGBT? We allow allies to come. We think that allies have a really important role in promoting LGBT equality at the university. And your network can be a way to recruit people. Social activities are really, really important, as long as the LGBT network doesn't become a social club. And I've worked for organisations in this area where the LGBT network has become a standard Friday night out in Canal Street, and that's the sum activity of the network. Social activities are important, but they have their place. For smaller organisations, and I've done this before as well, if you have a small organisation and a small number of LGBT staff, think about joining up with similar networks. So I spent 4 years working for the Fire and Rescue Service. We had a small number of out LGBT staff, but we formed a uniform services network. So we linked in with the police, with the ambulance service, with the local military staff networks as well. So if you've got a small organisation or a small number of staff, actually join up with other people who may be in the same position. So in terms of role models and champions, so there is our Deputy Vice-Chancellor. The image on the left is a message that is presented at induction. All new starters get to hear the Deputy Vice-Chancellor talk about why LGBT equality is important to him, why it's important to the university. And throughout the year, we run social media messages. So again, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor is quoted there on the university's Twitter. Really important, not your HR Twitter, not your equalities team Twitter, the corporate university Twitter site. And that was on Ida Hobbit, which is International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia. Talk a bit about policies. So we've reviewed all our policies. It's very easy for colleagues in operational HR when writing things like a maternity leave policy, paternity leave policy, to forget that the language should be gender neutral. And actually, wherever possible, shouldn't use his or her, shouldn't even use mother or father. If you think about a same-sex female couple, one of those will be entitled to go on paternity leave should they have a child. So don't talk about the mother and the father. There are lots of different types of families other than traditional families. Think about any benefits that you offer. Are they LGBT inclusive? So we have an employee assistance program that has a specific page around LGBT equality and the issues that LGBT people might face. We use our staff networks to consult on policies, so we recognise that we can only get so much of it right. And what we do is we send things like the family-friendly policies to our networks and say, what do you think of that? Is this right? Is the terminology right? Is the language right? So you utilise your staff networks as a resource, and that's why staff are allowed to go, because it is work. I'd say utilise the resources from Stonewall. There's lots of free stuff available on their website. And any organisations in the public sector, you can use your equality impact assessment process to help with inclusive policy making. I'm not going to say it was all plain sailing. There are some barriers. We explicitly give network members the right to attend networks. That doesn't stop some managers from saying, well, I can't have more than one person out of the department at the same time. So what we did was we made it explicit in terms of reference, but then got our champion to make a very public announcement that actually this was work and staff could go. You can consider using your PDR annual appraisal processes and recognise the contribution of staff network membership and the work that the networks do. Just because it's not strictly in the day job, it's not that it's not bringing anything for the university. And a warning around staff networks is about the G in LGBT. LGBT staff networks can very much forget that actually within that homogenous group, there are lots of different identities with particular needs, particular issues. So just some good practice, some of the things we did, because what I was keen today was not to just kind of talk at you about diversity, but try and give you some hints and tips, the sorts of things that you might be able to do in your own organisation. We recognise that because we recruit for staff and students both nationally and internationally, that Manchester may well be the destination of choice for LGBT students and staff, given the city's history, the city's politics. And I think historically what we'd kind of done was gone, well, you know, Canal Street's over there, off you go, have a great 3 years, and then you'll graduate. But actually, the commercial gay scene is not for everybody, and for a number of reasons it's not appropriate for everybody. So we produced a guide for staff and students that talked about local LGBT venues, but actually talked about where you could find an LGBT inclusive GP surgery, inclusive places of worship, local LGBT sports and activities clubs. And we used the guide to profile some of our staff role models. So we have a series of LGBT staff role models who talk about what it's like to be out at Manchester Met, what it was like when they came out, how supportive or not their colleagues have been, what would they say to somebody who was thinking about coming out at work. So this gets given to all staff at induction, and it's available to all students as they arrive for Freshers' Fair, and we circulate it, and it's available online. And you're welcome to access that link if you just search MMU LGBT, I'm sure you find it. So it allowed us to do things like healthcare, inclusive sports, inclusive worship, stuff around LGBT families and local support groups, how to report hate crime, should you be unfortunate to suffer a hate crime in the city. It also allowed us to address some of the issues around intersectionality, recognising that not all of our LGBT staff are going to be white gay men, for example. So some of our role model profiles here talk about the intersection between sexual orientation and ethnicity, disability, ethnicity there again, age, so that's one of our students who acts as an LGBT role model and talks about his experiences at Manchester Met. Sometimes it is the simple things. So we ran a campaign on International Day Against Homophobia. We bought a pack of these cards that were rainbow coloured on one side and had a statement, I support LGBT equality because. That cost us £10. And we asked staff and students to fill them out, take a picture and tweet it. And that got 24,000 Twitter impressions for something that was just a kind of, maybe we should try something like this. We got people contacting us because they wanted to become LGBT allies, LGBT role models. That entire program literally cost £10 out of the budget. So sometimes it is the simple things and not the big, big pieces. Some other good practice tips. So our marketing team created a rainbow version of the university logo that was used over the Pride Festival. So things like our recruitment team changed their logo to the rainbow-coloured university logo. We got some specialist comms around Pride and Manchester Met Proud, which is a university-wide hashtag. And we run something in our internal staff magazine called 5 Minutes With. So the two Pride coordinators there did a 5 Minutes With and talked about why it was so important that the university was involved with Pride. So in terms of the successful outcomes for the university, we've recently, and it was as recently as last week, been awarded an Athena Swan Bronze Award for our work around gender equality. And this award is valid until November 2021, until we've completed that action plan that I talked about around gender inequality. And again, we will then resubmit and see what effect those actions have had. The university is the only university in the UK to hold a Gold Award for the Disability Standard. This is through the Business Disability Forum. There are actually only 6 employers in the UK that hold a Gold Award, and the university is one of them. And in terms of our Stonewall journey, in the last 2 years, we've risen 150 places in the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index. We're currently ranked 16th in the top 100 and joint second in the education sector. There's no doubt that these sorts of frameworks and charter marks and external accreditation will further help in terms of recruitment, in terms of things like our employee value proposition. So those are the 3 things I wanted to talk about and how we've worked through those and the external validations for the university. I'm happy to take any questions, observations, or discussion points.